Good morning. If you're not quite done with your communion yet, that's fine. I'm going to be rambling for a couple minutes, so you can just tune me out. I am not Jason. I am not our usual preacher of sermons. As he mentioned last week, we're going to have to use his words, guest speaker, which is me. I am the guest speaker. I traveled from very far away to get here. I traveled from all the way over from the tech booth. So normally I am back there, so this is a very fun opportunity for me to be able to take. As you can see, I won't say I don't have any sort of stand to hold my papers, but I'm trying to emulate Jason, because I really do admire the guy, to try and preach a little bit more like him, because I like having nothing between me and you guys. So I came up to him and I asked, "Hey Jason, I want to preach without a sermon paper. How do I do that?" And he said, "Okay, Mitch, here's what you do. Step 1, pick a topic you know, right? Step 2, practice. Step 3, practice. Step 4, practice. Step 5, have a cheat sheet." So I have composed a little bit of a cheat sheet, which I promise is definitely not right here. And if you see me over here, I'm definitely not looking at it. I was trying to figure out what to preach about today, because it's kind of an odd time to have a guest speaker give a sermon, because, well, we're right in the middle of a series. Last week, Jason talked about our church's big, hairy, audacious goal, or as to put it in more churchy terms, our vision. And then next week, he's going to keep talking about that same sort of thing. I won't give any spoilers away. So how do I pick something to preach about? Because if I preach about something completely irrelevant, everyone's going to forget whatever he said last week, and then he's going to be mad at me. And I don't want that. I got to pick something that's kind of relevant, something that I know a bit about, and something that I can offer a bit of unique perspective to. Well, last week Jason talked about why. Why do we have our vision, our big, hairy, audacious goal? Why do we have it? Why do we need it? And why is it that we think we can accomplish it? And so I personally have always liked the question why. As any of my family can tell you, that is a question I asked constantly as a child growing up. Why? Didn't matter about what, didn't matter where, when, how. I always wanted to know why. So I thought, well, you know what? Since I like asking why so much, I'll ask why. I can tell what you're probably thinking. Mitch, Jason already talked about why. So why are you talking about why again? Well, I'm going to be answering a different kind of why. You see, Jason was talking about why we have it and why it is that we think we can accomplish it. Instead, I'm going to be talking about why our community needs it. Now, for those of you online or those of you who don't know, our church's vision, which is laid out on our wonderful banners to either side, is to be an unbroken community. So why does Murphysboro need that? Well, to be honest, Murphysboro is a broken community. Now, this is something that actually can offer a little bit of perspective to. For those of you who don't know, I do have an alternate occupation outside of being here. I work as a delivery driver for a pizzeria in town with a very big delivery radius. So I've traveled all over Murphysboro. I've traveled all the way from Riverside to Hanover Lane to Westwood Hills. I've traveled all the way to Town Creek Road. I've traveled to Old Highway 13, even all the way to DeSoto. So I have been all around the parts of Murphysboro, and I can tell you confidently Murphysboro is a broken community. So I thought to myself, okay, Mitch, you've got a topic. Now, what's a perfectly vague title that you can take advantage of in your sermon? 3 M's of life. There we go. Now nobody knows what I'm talking about, and they have to ask the question, well, what does that mean? So what are the 3 M's of life? Well, for our answers, we're going to go look in Ecclesiastes. Now, Ecclesiastes is a perfectly cheerful, wonderful book. It has one of the most uplifting worldviews I've ever seen. And it gives off a pretty okay start. We'll start in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to be hopping around a little bit, though. Chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. A good start. A little dry, but a good start. It tells us exactly who we're getting our information from. Ecclesiastes is a book that is supposed to impart knowledge, and we're getting knowledge apparently from the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read that, my first thought is Solomon. Now, traditionally, Solomon has been attributed to Ecclesiastes. But ancient Jews loved their wordplay and their metaphors. So sometimes phrases or words don't mean what they literally mean. Take the phrase son of David, for example. Son of David can literally mean Solomon, the son of David, but it can also mean somebody who is just descended from David, or somebody who has followed closely in David's footsteps. Secondly, king in Jerusalem, unfortunately, does not literally mean could literally not mean king in Jerusalem. It could also refer to someone who is a close friend to the king, or an advisor to the king, or an administrator. However, that doesn't change very much. Whether this is from Solomon or from one of David's descendants who was a close advisor to the current king, we know several things about the author. First of all, that they followed closely in David's footsteps, a righteous man. Secondly, that he was in a position of authority, that he was most likely wise and knowledgeable. So after that okay start, we know who we're getting our information from. Usually when you're writing, professors and teachers will tell you in your first couple of sentences you need to give your thesis statement. This is a statement that essentially outlines the core of what you're writing. And Ecclesiastes gives a very strong thesis statement in the very next verse. Meaningless. Meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Like I said, a very uplifting book. Now, what is the author trying to get across here? Meaningless is apparently the message, but what's meaningless? Life itself is meaningless. Repetition was really important to ancient Jews and ancient Jewish writers. So when they repeated something ad nauseum, they really wanted you to pay attention to it. This author is trying to get across that to him, and he believes that all life for everybody is meaningless. Warning, I'm going to be saying that word a lot. Now, Ecclesiastes is essentially it's essentially a science experiment of this writer trying to find things and trying to see if he can find a meaning in life. He tries all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, he doesn't really find much. Now, the answer to my question that I posed to you, what are the 3 M's of life, is actually already answered. Meaningless, meaningless, meaningless. Those are the 3 M's of life. Well, I guess that's it. Everybody go home. No, but each of these meaningless words means something a little bit different. And that's something that we'll dive into as we get through the text, and we'll find that not only in addition to not only these 3 meaninglesses, but other things as well, that the author believes wisdom is meaningless, riches are meaningless, and work is meaningless. Now, I encourage you to read Ecclesiastes yourself, because these 3 things aren't all that the author talks about. He dives into a few other things as well that I don't have quite the time to get into, because otherwise we'd be here for the next week and a half. But we're going to slowly work our way. I promise we won't be too long, but work our way through these 3 phrases. So firstly, wisdom is meaningless. Now we're going to jump down to later on in the chapter, Ecclesiastes 1, verses 12 through 15 and 18. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Now let's pause for a second and break this down a little bit. The first sentence is pretty self-explanatory. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Just a reiteration of what we already know. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Like I said, Ecclesiastes is essentially a science experiment. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. We already have our first hint of the answer that our author found, and he didn't like it. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Have you ever tried to catch the wind? It's not very easy. In fact, it's pretty much impossible. But let's not stop there. Verse 15 and then 18. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Now you notice that I actually separated these last two bits of verse from the earlier section. Because these last two bits of verse here, verses 15 and 18, are actually poetry. And this is something that you see a lot of in Ecclesiastes, where the author will have a chunk of prose explaining either what he did or what he had to try to find meaning in life. And then in poetry, he will give his findings. He will explain what it was that he found. Now, poetry was really, really important in history keeping, especially for the Jews, for the Israelites. Israelites, for a lot of their history, didn't have a written history. They didn't write it down in books or scrolls. Instead, it was passed down by word of mouth. It was passed down orally. And when you're remembering something, especially something as long as the entire history of a civilization, it's a lot easier to remember that if it's in poetry. It's the same way that a lot of us can remember our favorite song but can't remember our bank pen number. So when an author wanted to emphasize something, wanted something for you to remember, they put it in poetry so that it would be easier for you to remember. So let's start breaking this poetry down and see if we can find out what the author's trying to say. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. This right here is something in poetry we like to call imagery. Now, imagery is just a fancy word that means when a poem writer has the opportunity to just say something, he chooses not to. Instead, he tries to use words to evoke an image in your mind to try and get the point across. So what's the image here that he's trying to generate? What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. It's actually kind of simple. You can't fix the past. You can't fix your mistakes. No matter what you learn, no matter how much knowledge and wisdom you attain, everything that you have already done and you have already broken can't be fixed. One of the big motivators for gaining more knowledge and wisdom is mistakes. Well, think about it. If you're in a kitchen and you see a pot of boiling water on the stove and you reach out and touch it, you're going to learn pretty quickly you shouldn't touch pots of boiling water. You've gained more wisdom in that area, but you still have to deal with your burnt finger, don't you? No matter what you do, you can't ever change the past. It's always going to be there. And in that way, wisdom is meaningless because you can never fix what you've already broken. You can't gain what you've already lost. Secondly, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. This one's a little bit more straightforward. Do you know that there's a study that suggests that pessimistic people with a more low view of low outlook on the world tend to have a realer picture of world events in their mind? What I mean by that is that they have a picture of the world and events that tends to be more closer to reality. Now, full disclosure, that study has been contested, but it's interesting to think about, isn't it? Pessimistic people tend to have a much more realistic view of the world. Sometimes I wonder if it's just having a more realistic view of the world doesn't just make you a pessimistic person. Could be. Because I'll tell you right now, this world is messed up. And that's an understatement. Wars go on in this world. Murders, thefts, rapes, all kinds of crimes and injustices, genocides. And not all of them are solved. Not all of them are stopped. I'll do you one better. Murphysboro is a pretty messed up place. And I mean that with all the love in my heart. But like I told you, I've driven all across this town. And it's screwed up inside. I've seen people who are addicted to drugs and can barely function. I've seen people who are tearing their own families apart with abuse. People who are so tired and exhausted from labor that they don't even want to come to the door to greet me. I've seen trailer parks that are crumbling and old and decrepit. Murphysboro is a broken place. But we're not going to linger on that. Instead, we're going to move on to the next meaningless thing. Riches are meaningless. Wealth is meaningless. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 8, like I said, we'll be hopping around a little bit. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. Now, a couple quick things. Firstly, wealth takes time to accumulate. There's an old phrase that time is money, and that's kind of true. Even if you already have generous funds, it takes time to accumulate more generous funds. So this was a treasury that was acquired over the course of many years. He devoted his life to finding wealth. And apparently he was successful. The treasure of kings and provinces, male and female singers, and a harem. Certainly not exactly a virtuous guy, but wealthy. But what's the end result of his wealth? Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 10 and 15. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. And then later on down, naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he comes, so he departs. He takes nothing from his labor that he can carry into his hand. Let's break down that first bit of poetry there. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Pretty simple. I think all of us kind of already understand the message. When you're set on acquiring money, and that's all you think about, you'll never be satisfied. Greed is a self-fueling cycle. Want money, get money. Want more money, get more money. And this is something that is evident all over the place and in the United States as well. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer as greed overcomes them. When greed overcomes you, you start doing horrible things. What's that? The most misquoted verse in all of history. The love of money is the root of all evil. And then secondly, a second reason why acquiring so much wealth is meaningless, you can't take it with you. Naked a man comes from his mother wombs, and as he comes, so he departs. What he's saying there is when you die, you don't get to take anything with you to the afterlife. You don't get to take your gold. You don't get to take your silver. You don't get to take your house, your car. You don't get to take all of your dollar bills, your bank account. None of it stays with you. And so you put all this effort into acquiring more wealth. You invest really smartly. You work really hard, and you build up your finances. And then where does it go? Not with you. And if you're really good at acquiring money, you didn't even get to spend much of it. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking, oh, well, Mitch, the point of acquiring wealth and funds is so that I can pass it on to the next generation, to my children and my children's children, and they can have easy and satisfactory lives. And you know what? Fair point. Well, I would say fair point, but as we'll see, and this kind of interlaces with the next bit of meaningless. Work is meaningless, or as some Bibles say it, toil is meaningless. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. Seems a little bitter. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. There's a certain worldview that philosophers have classified as something called humanism. Now, humanism, to put it briefly, is called a secular worldview. That just means it's a worldview that doesn't rely on some sort of deity or religion. And humanism says that there is no God, life is meaningless, but we can make life have meaning by working towards improving the next generation. Those are the basics of humanism. And this verse here is almost a direct counter to that. Because the author of Ecclesiastes turns to them and he says, well, what happens when they're not as wise as you are and they tear everything down? All your work was for nothing. All your money was for nothing. All your hard work and toil for improving society and building things up was for nothing. Let me tell you that I have seen some hard workers here in Murphysboro. And that is a compliment. But that work in and of itself does not provide meaning. I used to work over at Royal King as a stocker. I used to put items on the shelf. We used to work nights from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And so I'd go in at 9 p.m., I'd work all through the night, I'd come home at 5 a.m. and I'd fall right in bed, and then I'd wake up at like 3 or 4 p.m., and my legs and feet would hurt so much that I would literally not be able to get up out of the bed. But I'd have to, so that I could get up, get ready, and go to work at 9 p.m. For almost 2 years I did that. Working hard just so that I can get paid a little bit, just so I can make the bills and make rent and make enough for a little bit of food, so that I can go back to working hard, so I can make a little bit of money, so I can pay my bills and get a little bit of food, so I can work hard. Over and over and over again, the cycle never ends. There's no end to hard work. And work in and of itself does not provide anything to you except for the ability to do more work. There are a lot of Murphysboro who have a similar story. There are a lot of people in Murphysboro who wish they even had work. I'm going to flip-flop a little bit and jump back into talking about money, because I think this is important. Did you know that statistically, the average income in Murphysboro area is about $19,000 a year, total? That includes work income, that includes welfare, that includes all sorts of things. In fact, did you know that 40% of people who live in Murphysboro make less than $30,000 a year? Even further, 15% of people who live in Murphysboro make less than $15,000. There is a real income disparity here. And you can see the effects. I've seen houses, apartments, trailer parks. People live in them, but it doesn't look like it. Rusted cars. Growth just goes unabated. Sidewalks are cracked. People are either drug addicted or alcohol addicted. They either work or they don't, and they have to subsist on welfare. It's a broken area. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 22 through 23 goes further into talking about work. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This, too, is meaningless. This is a reiteration of what I've just been saying. You work hard, you hurt your body and your mind, you worry about work, and it gains you nothing. Nothing to take into the next life, and depending on what you work, nothing to take into this life. So how does this relate into why Murphysboro needs our vision to be an unbroken community? Because life in Murphysboro is meaningless. It is. All across the spectrum, all races, all genders, all amounts and levels of wealth and class, life is meaningless. From the poor, drug-addicted man who wishes that he had even a factory job, to the rich property broker who is sitting on hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars of wealth. But that's not all that Ecclesiastes says, and that's not the message that I want to leave you with. Because we have the key to a more meaningful life. Ecclesiastes, again, chapter 2, verses 24 and 25. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. Now hold on, author of Ecclesiastes. You just got done telling us that all of this was meaningless. All this work, all this toil, all this wisdom, all this money, all this pleasure was meaningless. The key's in the next sentence, though. This, too, I see, is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? There is the key. God, Jesus Christ, our faith. Murphysboro is a meaningless, broken community, and how do we fix that? Why do they need us? Because we have the answer. We can fix it. But we have to get out there to do it. When this vision was made, be an unbroken community, this wasn't made with the intent that a few people would try to uphold it. 15 people, 20 people try to uphold it out of our church. No, this was a declaration that all of us are going to work for it. You see, God provides. God provides meaning. God provides wisdom. God provides us with gifts that we can use to work for his kingdom. God provides hope. That's what our community needs. But all of us here, every member of our church, heck, every Christian, has to go out there and offer it. That's why our community needs our vision. Because we and God can give them meaning and hope. Would you pray with me? Father God, thank you today for giving us the opportunity to come together. I just pray and ask you that you will instill yourself in our hearts, in our thoughts, and our actions. Give us the inspiration and the means to begin working for you in this community. Give us the wisdom and the love to go out there and see Murphysboro with your eyes so that we can begin to make it an unbroken community for your kingdom. It is in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.